Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong there? The desert air shimmered under the scorching Afghan sun as the Blackhawk's rotors slowed to a whining stop, scattering dust across the landing zone. Out stepped Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, a small, unassuming woman whose rucksack looked heavier than she did. She blinked against the light, her expression calm but unreadable. Around her, Marines moved with the rhythm of habit, confident, loud, purposeful. She was quiet, deliberate. It was the kind of silence that drew attention without asking for it. From the command post above, Colonel William "Billy" Mitchell watched through binoculars, his jaw tight. 27 years in the Corps had taught him to recognize patterns in enemy movements, in weather, in people. Something about this woman didn't fit the pattern. Her file said intelligence analyst. Yet the way she moved, scanning exits, assessing cover, her boots falling in precise cadence, wasn't something they taught behind a computer terminal. Mitchell's instincts whispered a question he didn't like. What the hell was an analyst doing here? Inside the command center, he tossed her transfer papers onto the table. "CENTCOM's playing games again," he muttered. "They send me a desk jockey 2 days before an op that could blow this whole sector open." Major Hernandez, his second-in-command, glanced at the documents. "She's fluent in 4 regional dialects, sir. Pattern analysis specialist. Could be helpful for the Talon Valley sweep." "Fluent or not, I don't like ghosts with incomplete files," Mitchell said, flipping the folder shut. "Half her deployments are redacted, too many blanks." Down on the tarmac, Sarah was escorted toward the briefing area. She didn't look intimidated, though every face that turned her way carried the same unspoken judgment. "She's not one of us." In this place, respect was currency, and nobody gave it for free. When the afternoon briefing began, Sarah sat at the back of the room, hands folded neatly, listening. Around her were 16 battle-hardened Marines, Team Viper men who'd bled together through 3 deployments. Each carried scars, both seen and unseen. She didn't try to speak, didn't try to blend in, just listened, observed. Colonel Mitchell stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "Operation Windows 72 hours," he said. "Intel suggests Haqqani leadership's holdup in a compound outside Talon Valley. Minimal civilian presence. We go in, we confirm, we clear. Simple." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room, stopping briefly on the newcomer. "We've been given an analyst for support." His tone made analyst sound like a curse. "Staff Sergeant Chen, correct?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of composure that annoyed men who thought they'd seen it all. Mitchell's stare hardened. "Everyone here earned their spot in blood and fire. Out here, there's no room for question marks. I need to know who I'm working with." The room fell silent. The challenge was clear. "So," he said finally, his tone almost casual, "in your previous assignments, did they give you a call sign, or should we assign you one?" It was a joke, the kind soldiers used to test newcomers. But Sarah didn't smile, didn't blink. "I had one, sir." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Let's hear it then." She met his eyes, Black Mamba. The words hung in the air like a drawn knife. The laughter that should have followed never came. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Mitchell's face froze, a flicker of recognition flashing across it before he masked it with a cough. 2 of the older Marines exchanged glances, expressions tightening. Mitchell forced a half-smile. "Black Mamba, huh? That's unique." But his tone had lost its edge. He dismissed the meeting abruptly, hiding the questions burning in his mind. Outside, he found himself staring at the horizon, the low hum of generators blending with distant thunder. The name echoed in his head, Black Mamba. He'd heard it before. Kandahar, 2019. A mission that had gone sideways. A ghost unit that didn't officially exist. And one operator who'd saved an entire platoon from an ambush that should have been their last sunrise. That operator had vanished afterward, buried beneath layers of classified reports. Could it be her? Before he could think further, an explosion thundered from the eastern perimeter, a flash of orange cutting through the heat haze. Sirens blared. Mitchell grabbed the radio. "Contact east side, defensive positions now." Chaos erupted. The base shuddered under impact as RPGs slammed into the outer wall. Marines sprinted to positions, shouting over the crackle of machine gun fire. The attack had come fast, too coordinated to be random. In the command post, Hernandez was shouting over static. "Comms are jammed, sir. We've lost contact with Echo Base and the QRF." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Get me a sitrep." Then out of the corner of his eye he saw Sarah. Calm, focused, checking her weapon with practiced precision, a motion no analyst should have known by heart. When he ordered a rescue team assembled for a trapped patrol half a click out, she stepped forward. "Sir," she said, her tone clipped but firm, "I should join the response team." "This isn't an analyst's job, Staff Sergeant." "With respect, Colonel," she replied, meeting his gaze, "I know those ridge lines better than anyone here, and you're down 3 snipers with Bravo team on patrol." Mitchell hesitated. The base trembled with another impact. She stood there, unflinching amid the chaos. Something about her eyes, not fear, not defiance, just cold, disciplined certainty. He finally nodded. "Gear up, you're with Alpha Team." Minutes later, Sarah was running across open ground beside Lieutenant Rodriguez and 7 Marines, dust and smoke swirling around them. The trapped patrol was pinned behind a stone structure halfway up a narrow valley. The terrain was unforgiving, jagged ridges and dry gullies, perfect for an ambush. "We need to flank them from the northeast," Sarah said, pointing toward a steep rock face. "They won't expect fire from that angle." Rodriguez frowned. "That's a climb, not a flank. You'll be exposed the whole way." "I can make it," she said simply. "Cover me every 3 minutes." Before he could object, the enemy fire intensified. A Marine went down, screaming. Rodriguez gritted his teeth. 3 minutes, he shouted. "Move." Sarah sprinted forward, hugging the ground, then began climbing. The rocks tore at her gloves, dust filling her lungs. Bullets pinged off the cliffside as she pressed herself into a narrow crevice. Shrapnel grazed her cheek, warm blood trickling down. But she didn't stop, didn't look back. At the top, she assembled her rifle with practiced hands. Through her scope, she saw 17 fighters, more than the intel had warned. This wasn't an ordinary attack. It was too clean, too timed. She took a slow breath, exhaled. The world shrank to the quiet circle of her scope. 1 shot, the enemy commander dropped. 2nd, the machine gunner fell. 3rd, another fighter collapsed before he could fire a rocket. Each trigger pull was deliberate, surgical. Below, Rodriguez's men broke free from their pinned position. Then she saw movement on the horizon, another convoy approaching. Heavier weapons. Her stomach tightened. "Second wave incoming," she radioed. "They're carrying surface-to-air missiles." "Impossible," Rodriguez shouted back. "Intel had nothing." "It's not Taliban," she cut him off. "These are Haqqani specialists. Someone leaked our plans." Her pulse stayed steady, but a cold realization crept in. This wasn't just an ambush, it was an execution. Someone inside had sold them out. Down below, the valley echoed with gunfire. Smoke filled the air, the scent of cordite and blood mixing with dust. Then more explosions from the base, distant but unmistakable. "Colonel Mitchell," she radioed, "you have hostiles inside the wire." Only static answered. Rodriguez looked up toward her. "We're cut off," he said grimly. "No comms, wounded men, and that second wave's closing fast. What's your call, Black Mamba?" She hesitated for half a breath, long enough for the weight of that name to sink in. Then she chambered another round. "Get the wounded to the drainage culvert east of your position," she said. "I'll buy you time." Rodriguez stared. "That's suicide." She met his eyes through the scope. "So is waiting." For the next 7 minutes, she became the storm. precision shots echoing through the valley, controlled bursts that kept the enemy disoriented, their formation breaking apart under invisible pressure. She moved along the ridge like a ghost, never staying in one place long enough to be marked. When her magazine clicked empty, she took one last look at the battlefield: smoke, dust, men dragging the wounded through the culvert, her team barely holding on, and then she descended silently into the shadows. Night was falling by the time they regrouped, the valley cooling under a blood-red sky. Sarah tended to the injured by flashlight, quick, efficient, emotionless. Tourniquets, morphine, sutures. The kind of calm that only came from experience, too much of it. Rodriguez watched her in silence. Finally, he said, "You've done this before." She didn't look up. "We move before dawn, they'll have night vision." Her tone left no room for discussion. As she sketched a crude map in the dirt, the others gathered around. "The base is compromised," she said quietly. "Our only chance is to reach Cheyenne Valley. There's a village there, someone who still remembers our flag." 15 clicks through hostile ground, Rodriguez said. She looked up at him, a faint trace of something, maybe regret, in her eyes. "Better than waiting to die here." Somewhere behind them, explosions echoed from the base, distant thunder over black mountains. None of them spoke. The desert night was mercilessly still. And as Sarah stood, shouldering her rifle once more, Rodriguez asked the question that had been haunting them all. "Who are you really?" She didn't answer. She just adjusted her gear and whispered, mostly to herself. "Just someone trying to finish what she started." Then she walked into the darkness, leading the way, a silent shadow against the dying light. What made her walk ahead of everyone, when even the night itself seemed hostile? The mountains swallowed sound, their jagged silhouettes rising like sentinels under a fractured moon. Sarah led the way without a word, the faint beam of her red-filtered flashlight cutting across the dust. Behind her, 7 Marines moved in silence, their boots muffled by the sand, their breaths heavy from exhaustion and adrenaline. No one asked how she knew where to go. She seemed to navigate by instinct, reading the shape of the ground, the smell of the wind, the way shadows moved between rocks. Every step was measured, calculated. Rodriguez trailed a few meters behind her, his rifle raised, eyes scanning the ridgelines. He didn't like the silence. It felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. "You ever gonna tell me how you knew that ridge route earlier?" he whispered. Sarah didn't turn. "Pattern recognition, it's what they trained me for." "That wasn't training," he said quietly. "That was muscle memory." She didn't respond, and for a few minutes the only sound was the crunch of boots and the faint clatter of gear. The Marines were tired, bone-tired, their bodies scraping the limits of endurance. 2 wounded men leaned against makeshift crutches fashioned from rifle stocks. Another stumbled, caught himself, and pushed on. Sarah kept the pace steady, not too fast to break them, not too slow to let fear catch up. By the time they reached the first ridge, the sky had begun to pale. Faint traces of dawn painted the horizon. The valley below shimmered with mist, beautiful in a way that felt cruel. Sarah raised a hand. "We hold here." The Marines sank to the ground, gulping water from canteens, too drained to speak. Sarah crouched beside them, scanning the horizon through her scope. Her face was streaked with dust and dried blood, but her eyes were clear, sharp. Rodriguez watched her in the fatting dark. "You really think we'll find help in Cheyenne Valley?" "If the elder's still there," she said. "He's helped American units before, hid them, fed them." "And if he's not?" "Then we improvise." He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "You talk like someone who stopped being scared a long time ago." Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "Everyone's scared, Lieutenant. Some of us just don't show it." A pause, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, filled with things neither of them wanted to say. Down below, The first light revealed the scars of the previous night's battle, smoke trails still rising from the direction of Fob Condor. They could see flashes in the distance, explosions that didn't sound like artillery. Rodriguez frowned. They're still fighting. Sarah lowered her scope, or cleaning up what's left. The words hung between them like a shadow. They moved again at sunrise, following a dry riverbed that twisted between cliffs. The heat returned quickly, pressing down like a physical weight. Flies buzzed, dust stuck to their skin. By midday, the group was dehydrated and fatting. Sarah called a brief halt beneath an outcropping of rock. She handed her canteen to one of the younger Marines, Jenkins, whose lips were cracked and bleeding. "You'll need this more than me," she said. He shook his head. "Ma'am, I can't." "That's an order," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. He took it, hesitated, then asked, "Black Mamba, that really your call sign?" Sarah's eyes softened slightly. It was. "Why?" She looked away toward the horizon. "Because someone thought I was venomous." He smiled weakly. "Were they wrong?" Sarah didn't answer. The heat shimmered, time blurred, they kept moving. By late afternoon they reached a narrow pass overlooking Cheyenne Valley and stopped. Smoke rose from the village below. Black, thick, wrong. Rodriguez cursed under his breath. "Looks like we're too late." Sarah's jaw tightened. Through her binoculars she saw charred rooftops, the skeletons of houses. A column of armed men patrolled the main road, not villagers. Haqqani militia, the same insignia she'd seen through her scope the night before. She crouched low, signaling the others to stay down. "They found the village," she whispered. Rodriguez's voice was tight. "So what now?" Sarah studied the terrain, her mind running through possibilities. "We wait for dark, then move north toward the irrigation tunnels. There's an old Soviet outpost 2 clicks east of here. We can shelter there." "And the elder?" Her throat tightened. "If he's still alive, he's a prisoner. We can't help him yet." Rodriguez clenched his fists but didn't argue. He'd seen enough death to know when hope was a luxury. The Marines waited in silence, the sun sliding behind the mountains. One of the wounded men drifted into unconsciousness. Another muttered prayers under his breath. Sarah checked her rifle again, methodically, action, bolt, magazine, the small ritual keeping her focus sharp. As darkness settled, they began their descent. Halfway down the slope, a gunshot cracked through the stillness. One of the Marines cried out, hit in the leg. Sniper fire. "Cover," Sarah hissed. The group scattered behind rocks. Dust exploded where bullets struck. The air filled with the flat, merciless rhythm of precision fire. "They've got Overwatch," Rodriguez shouted. "We're pinned." Sarah peered through her scope, tracing the origin of the flashes. "North Ridge, 600 meters, 2 shooters." "You can't make that shot from here," Rodriguez said. "I can if you give me 10 seconds. She dropped her pack, adjusted her rifle, and inhaled deeply, the calm before a storm. The world slowed. The gunfire faded to a distant hum. Through the scope she found the glint of glass, a scope reflection. Exhale. 1 shot. The first sniper went down. Before the second could relocate, she fired again, a fraction faster, a breath smoother. Silence. The Marine stared at her in disbelief. "Move," she said simply, reloading. "We won't get a second chance." They pushed on through the darkness, hearts hammering, until they reached the remnants of the Soviet outpost, concrete walls half buried in sand, rusted radio towers leaning against the wind. Inside it smelled of dust and history, old wars and forgotten names. They sealed the entry with debris, lit a single red lamp, and began tending to the wounded. Rodriguez watched Sarah clean her rifle, her hands steady despite the tremor of fatigue. "You saved us twice today," he said quietly. "That makes you either lucky or something else entirely." She looked up. "Luck runs out, training doesn't." He hesitated. "You were special operations, weren't you? before they buried your file." Sarah didn't answer right away. She sat back, staring at the flickering lamp. "Kandahar, 2019, she said finally. "A convoy went dark, wrong intel, bad leadership. We walked into an ambush." Her voice stayed even, but the memories moved behind her eyes like ghosts. 17 of us went in, 4 came out. Rodriguez swallowed hard. "You were one of them." "I was the one who got them out," she said softly. "After that, they reassigned me, said my talents were better suited for intelligence work." "Because you didn't die." "Because I didn't obey." The words hit like a confession. The room fell quiet except for the faint buzz of the lamp. Sarah rubbed a scar on her wrist almost absently. "They thought they were punishing me," she said. "Maybe they were right. Sitting behind a desk, watching patterns instead of people, it was easier not to feel anything." Rodriguez studied her, the edges of admiration and sorrow mingling in his expression. "And now?" She met his gaze. "Now I feel everything." For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying the ghosts of old wars. Near midnight, the radio on the table crackled, a faint signal cutting through static. Everyone froze. Sarah moved quickly, adjusting the dial. "Repeat, this is Condor Actual Survivors Respond." Mitchell, his voice. Rodriguez leaned in. "Sir, this is Alpha Team. We're alive, 7 effectives, 3 wounded." "Copy that," Mitchell's voice came through, faint but urgent. "Base secure. Multiple casualties. We have prisoners inside. Job confirmed. You're not safe in the open. Sitrep follows." Then static swallowed the rest. Sarah tried to re-establish the connection, but the signal was gone. She sat back slowly, eyes narrowing. "They're alive," Rodriguez said, relief breaking through his exhaustion. Sarah didn't share it. "They said inside job," she murmured. "That means someone fed them everything: patrol routes, operation plans, even call signs." He frowned. "You think the mole's still out there?" She shook her head. "If he was smart, he's already gone. But whoever he worked for, they'll try again." Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost to herself. "They weren't after the base. They were after us." Rodriguez looked at her sharply. "Us." "Team Viper, the Talon Valley mission. They knew the timing, the objective, everything." She stood, packing slowly, her thoughts moving faster than her words. "They knew I'd be here." The realization made her stomach tighten. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. Someone wanted the black Mamba found and finished. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, though there were no clouds. The sound of distant detonations, maybe shelling, maybe something worse. Sarah's eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the faint orange glow of fires lit the valley floor. Somewhere down there, someone was waiting, not for a base, not for a team, but for her. Rodriguez approached quietly. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," she said, her tone steady, "that this isn't over, not until we find whoever sold us out." He nodded slowly. "And if that means walking back into Talon Valley?" She met his eyes. "Then that's where I'm going." He hesitated. "Alone?" A faint smile crossed her lips, tired but resolute. "I started this alone." She looked out into the desert again, the wind tugging at her hair, her silhouette framed by the red glow of the lamp. "And sometimes," she whispered, "you have to walk through fire to find out who you really are." Why did the colonel's voice sound colder over the radio than it ever had in person? Morning light seeped into the ruins of the old Soviet outpost, revealing weary faces and the dull shine of weapons cleaned too many times. Sarah Chen sat alone near the doorway, watching the pale horizon as the first rays touched the valley floor. The silence between her and the team felt heavier than the walls around them. She hadn't slept. None of them really had. Rodriguez had finally dozed off, his back against a crumbling wall, one hand still gripping his rifle. 2 of the wounded were stable but feverish. The rest had drifted into a restless half-sleep that looked more like collapse than rest. Sarah checked her watch, 5:43 hours. If the rescue team was still out there, they should have arrived before dawn. The fact that they hadn't meant one of two things. Either they were delayed or someone didn't want them to be found. She rose quietly and moved to the radio. Static hummed, the only sound in the room. She adjusted the frequency again, scanning for the faint pulse of Mitchell's voice, but the airwaves were empty. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the metal casing, a face she barely recognized, dust-streaked, eyes hollow but alert. A faint scar traced her jawline, a souvenir from another life. Kandahar, 2019. She could still smell the cordite, still hear the screams. Behind her, Rodriguez stirred. Any luck? Nothing, she said softly. Signal's gone. He rubbed his eyes, trying to chase away fatigue. Maybe they're moving, setting up a forward base somewhere safer. Maybe, but her tone didn't sound convinced. Rodriguez studied her quietly. You've been up all night. I've had worse. He leaned forward, his voice lower. You said something last night about them knowing you'd be here. Sarah hesitated. I think the leak wasn't just about our operation, it was personal. You think this is about you. I know it is. The way she said it left no room for doubt. Rodriguez frowned. Why, you're an analyst, they wouldn't. Don't, she interrupted, her voice sharp. Don't call me that. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the radio down. They used to call me Black Mamba for a reason, Lieutenant. There were missions I wasn't supposed to survive, people I wasn't supposed to kill. Rodriguez's brow furrowed. That's not in any file. Of course not. They scrubbed it clean. You erase the ghost so no one remembers it was ever real. She exhaled slowly, looking out the doorway again. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. A soft crackle from the radio cut through her words. Both of them froze. Then faintly a voice. This is Condor Actual. Repeat, Viper, do you copy? Rodriguez lunged forward, grabbing the mic. This is Lieutenant Rodriguez, Alpha Team. We copy, sir. Static. Then, we read you, coordinates received, stay put, we're en route. Rodriguez exhaled in relief. Thank God they're coming for us. But Sarah didn't relax. Her eyes narrowed. That frequency wasn't open 10 minutes ago. He blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying someone knew exactly when to call. Her voice was calm, but underneath it ran a quiet current of dread. They packed quickly, preparing for extraction. The sound of approaching rotors came less than 20 minutes later, too soon, too exact. Dust swirled through the valley as a pair of Humvees appeared, kicking up trails across the ridge. Rodriguez waved a flare. Over here. Sarah stayed half-hidden behind a wall, scanning the horizon through her scope. The lead vehicle slowed, then stopped 100 meters short. Why aren't they closing in? She muttered. Maybe terrain's bad, Rodriguez said. She watched through the scope. 2 men stepped out of the vehicle. They wore American uniforms, but something was wrong. Their gear was clean, too clean. Their formation was off. Her stomach dropped. Get down. A split second later, the world exploded. The first rocket hit the outpost wall, turning concrete into fire. The blast threw Rodriguez backward, dust and shrapnel filling the air. Sarah hit the ground, ears ringing, the breath torn from her lungs. Ambush, she shouted, though she could barely hear her own voice. Cover fire, North Ridge. Bullets raked the ruins. The supposed rescue team opened up with mounted guns, cutting down anything that moved. The Marines scrambled to defensive positions, dragging the wounded deeper inside. Rodriguez coughed, blood gripping his side. You called it, he rasped. Sarah dragged him behind a wall. Stay low, don't move. She grabbed her rifle and crawled toward the entry breach. The air was thick with smoke and grit, the heat from the explosion warping the air. Through the haze, she caught glimpses of movement. 6, maybe 7 hostiles advancing in staggered formation. American helmets, non-American tactics. Her mind processed the pattern instinctively. Mercenaries, she muttered. Haqqani contractors. They were here to finish what the ambush hadn't. She squeezed off 3 precise shots. 2 went down, the others scattered for cover. The firefight erupted again, sharp, echoing, relentless. Inside the outpost, one of the wounded Marines was crying out. Another tried to suppress the bleeding with a torn uniform sleeve. The smell of smoke and iron hung thick. Sarah ducked back behind a broken wall, reloading. Her hand brushed the old Soviet emblem carved into the concrete. The ghosts of old wars whispered beneath her touch. She closed her eyes for half a second, just long enough to steady her breathing. Focus, not fear. When she opened them, the world narrowed again. She took aim. 1, 2, 3. Each shot precise. Each life ended before it could reach the threshold. When the last echo faded, there was nothing but the wind. She waited, listened, nothing. Rodriguez groaned behind her. Is it over? For now, she said, but the words didn't feel like truth. They moved through the ruins cautiously, clearing each corner. The first Humvee burned where it had stopped, smoke curling into the dawn. The men they'd killed wore American patches, falsified, stitched on wrong. Their dog tags were blank. Sarah crouched beside one body, turning it over. The man's wrist bore a small tattoo, a snake coiled around a sword. Her pulse quickened. This was Haqqani, she whispered. This was something else. Rodriguez limped over. Meaning. Meaning we're not fighting an insurgent cell. We're fighting whoever wanted the Black Mamba erased. He stared at her. You think this was sanctioned? I think it was personal. Her gaze lingered on the burning vehicle, the way the smoke drifted toward the sun. Someone inside our own system wants me dead, Lieutenant, and they just used your team to get close enough to finish the job. Before he could reply, the radio crackled again. Alpha Team, this is Condor Actual. What's your status? Sarah froze. It was Mitchell's voice, calm, controlled. She hesitated, then replied, Condor Actual, we've been ambushed. False rescue team. Hostiles neutralized. A pause, then, copy, sitrep received. Extraction inbound in 30, hold position. Sarah's eyes flickered. Hold position. The same phrase used by the imposters. Negative Condor, she said sharply. We're moving east to secondary LZ. The line went dead. Rodriguez frowned. What's wrong? Something off, she said. Mitchell's tone, it was too measured. He didn't even ask about casualties. You think he's compromised? She didn't answer. Couldn't. She didn't want to believe it. The colonel had trusted her once. He'd seen what she was. But trust had a way of dying quietly. By the time the sun reached its peak, they were moving again east toward the foothills. Every step felt heavier, like the desert itself wanted to hold them back. They reached the edge of a dry wadi and paused to rest. Sarah checked her map, tracing the contours with her finger. If we keep heading this way, we can intercept the road to Talon Valley by nightfall. Rodriguez leaned against a rock, pale from blood loss. You really think the colonel sold us out? I think, she said slowly, that someone close to him did. Maybe through him, maybe over him, doesn't matter. The chain's rotten somewhere. He gave a humorless chuckle. You always this optimistic. Only on good days. She looked out across the sand, her eyes distant. This war stopped being about enemies a long time ago. Now it's about ghosts, the ones we kill and the ones we carry. Rodriguez followed her gaze. And which one are you carrying? Sarah didn't answer. That night they made camp under the stars. The desert was cold now, the kind of cold that seeped into bone and memory. The men slept in shifts. Sarah sat awake, watching the horizon. In the distance, faint lights glimmered the outskirts of Talon Valley. Somewhere out there, the truth waited about the leak, the betrayal, the operation that had cost them everything. She reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, worn, creased. A group of soldiers standing beside a Blackhawk, laughing, alive. She traced one face with her thumb, a man in a patchless uniform, smiling beside her. She whispered his name, barely audible. Daniel. Then she closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself feel the weight of what she'd lost. The wind shifted. In the distance, a single flare rose into the night sky, white, cold, unnatural. Her eyes snapped open. That wasn't a rescue signal, it was a marker. They'd been found. What kind of enemy signals you before striking? The flare burned white against the black sky, too deliberate, too still. Sarah froze where she crouched, every instinct in her body locking into place. The Marines stirred awake, rifles in hand before they were even fully conscious. Rodriguez blinked against the light. That's ours, right? Sarah didn't answer. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The flare's glow reflected off the sand like pale fire, spreading shadows where there shouldn't be any. She raised her rifle slowly, scanning the horizon through her scope. No, she whispered. That's not a rescue signal, that's a mark. A second flare shot up, this one red. Then the night erupted. The first burst tore through the silence, automatic fire from the ridge line, tracer rounds stitching the darkness. The Marines dove for cover as bullets shredded the sandbags around them. Sarah hit the dirt, rolling behind a dune as rounds hissed overhead. They've got elevation, she shouted. Suppressive fire East Ridge. Rodriguez returned fire blindly, the muzzle flash illuminating his blood-stained sleeve. How the hell did they find us? Because someone told them where to look. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, cold, certain. She moved low, fast, counting the rhythm of the gunfire. 3 shooters on the ridge, 1 flanking, the rest moving to encircle. She fired once, a clean, deliberate shot. 1 rifle went silent. Then she moved again, never in the same spot twice. The Marines followed her lead, shifting positions, firing in bursts. The valley echoed with sound, the harsh percussion of survival. Rodriguez shouted something she didn't catch. The roar of explosions swallowed his words. The night turned red as mortars hit the far slope, shaking the ground. Shrapnel ripped the air. Sarah ducked, feeling the heat sear past her cheek. When she looked up again, Jenkins, the young Marine who'd taken her canteen, was down, motionless. For a moment, everything inside her stilled. Then something changed in her eyes. She grabbed his rifle and rolled into position, sighting the mortar team. 3 men moving fast, confident, professional, not insurgents. She squeezed the trigger 3 times. 3 bodies fell before they could reload. Rodriguez crawled toward her, shouting over the din, "We can't hold this position. Too exposed." She nodded once, scanning for escape routes. Drainage channel 2 o'clock, move. The survivors broke from cover, dragging the wounded as bullets chased them through the sand. Sarah was the last to move, covering their retreat with calculated bursts. Each shot bought them seconds. They slid into the drainage channel, a narrow trench carved by years of flash floods. The walls were high enough to conceal them, but not from thermal scanners. Rodriguez gasped for air beside her. "You think they'll follow?" "They won't need to," she said. "They already know where we're going." He frowned. "Where are we going?" Sarah's eyes met his in the dim starlight. "Back to Condor." Rodriguez blinked. "That base is a graveyard, you said it yourself." "I need to see who's left," she said quietly. "I need to look Mitchell in the eye." He hesitated. "You think he's the leak?" "I think he's standing next to whoever is." The wind howled through the valley, carrying the smell of smoke and blood. Sarah adjusted her rifle strap and started walking. The others followed, tired, broken, but moving. It took them until dawn to reach the lower ridge, overlooking Fob Condor. What had once been a bustling forward base was now a scar on the desert, burnt-out vehicles, twisted metal, and silence. The American flag that had flown over the command post was gone. Sarah crouched behind a wrecked Humvee, peering through binoculars. Movement, figures in uniform, American, but something was off again. Too organized, too quiet. Rodriguez swallowed hard. They don't look like rescue teams. They're not, she said. They're cleaning up. He stared. You mean? I mean someone's covering tracks. They waited until dusk before approaching. The air was thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of burned steel. Sarah moved first, silent as a shadow, signaling the others to fan out. The base smelled like death, spent rounds, oil, and charred flesh. Inside the operations tent, the walls were stripped bare. No maps, no files, just emptiness. Then a voice behind her. Drop your weapon. Sarah turned slowly, rifle raised halfway. Colonel Mitchell stood in the doorway, his face lined, uniform torn. His pistol was steady, but his eyes, they looked hollow. Sir, Sarah said, keeping her voice level, you're alive. Barely. He studied her in silence. You were supposed to be dead. So were you, she said softly. Mitchell lowered his weapon a fraction. I heard you made it out of the ambush. You and Rodriguez, the others. Gone, she said simply. He nodded once, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Then it's worse than I thought. She stepped closer. Who's behind this, Colonel? Who's feeding them our operations? Mitchell's expression darkened. You think I know. I think you've been keeping something from me since the day I got here. He exhaled, long and tired. You want the truth. The leak came from higher than me, higher than this entire theater. The moment your name showed up in the system, someone started asking questions, someone I couldn't ignore. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Who? Mitchell looked past her toward the blackened horizon. A defense contractor, private network embedded with Langley oversight, calls themselves Helios. The name hit like static. Helios, she repeated. They're ghosts with funding, private task groups, intelligence laundering, the kind of operation that doesn't exist until it kills you. Sarah's stomach turned cold. And what do they want with me? You're the one who burned their op in Kandahar. You remember the convoy you pulled out, the one nobody debriefed you about afterward. She nodded slowly. Mitchell's voice hardened. They were running an unsanctioned black asset, a target with ties to Helios operations. You exposed it. You weren't supposed to make it home. She stared at him, realization dawning like frost. So this isn't war anymore. No, Mitchell said quietly, it's cleanup. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The desert wind pushed through the broken tent walls, fluttering the torn map remnants. Finally, she said, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't believe it at first, he said, until they came for me too. He reached into his vest, pulling out a flash drive wrapped in cloth. This is everything I salvaged before they wiped our systems. Operational routes, names, coordinates, but you'll need to move fast. Helios has strike teams in country. Sarah took the drive, her fingers brushing his. What about you? Mitchell gave a faint, bitter smile. My clearance expired the moment I started asking questions. Then a sound outside, crunch of boots on gravel. Mitchell's eyes widened. They're here. Before Sarah could respond, gunfire ripped through the tent. Mitchell shoved her aside, a round hit him in the chest. Sir, she shouted, catching him as he fell. He coughed, blood staining his uniform. Get out, get it to Echo Base. There's still one man you can trust, Hernandez. Colonel. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Finish it, Black Mamba. His hand went limp. His eyes stayed open, fixed on something she couldn't see. Sarah's jaw clenched. Then she picked up her rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and stepped into the storm. The attackers moved in formation, 6 men, night optics, suppressed weapons. Professional, efficient. But she was faster. The first went down before he even cleared the wall. The second took a round through the visor. The third managed to fire once, missed. She didn't. By the time it was over, the base was silent again. She crouched beside Mitchell's body, took his tags and whispered, "You kept your promise." Then she was gone into the dunes, the flash drive burning cold in her pocket. Hours later, miles away, Rodriguez found her by a dried-out riverbed, crouched beside a dying fire. He limped over, lowering himself beside her. "I heard the shots, thought I'd lost you." "You almost did," she said quietly. He studied her face, the dirt, the blood, the exhaustion. Was it him? She shook her head. "He was trying to protect me. We've been fighting the wrong enemy." "Then who the hell are we fighting?" Sarah looked toward the horizon, where faint lights blinked in the distance, the outline of a convoy moving through the desert. "The kind that doesn't wear a uniform," she said, "and doesn't believe in borders." Rodriguez followed her gaze. "Helios." She nodded once. "They're not done, and neither am I." The fire flickered low, painting her face in gold and shadow. Rodriguez asked quietly, "Why keep fighting, Sarah? You could disappear. No one would find you." She turned to him, her expression calm, but her eyes carried the weight of something deeper. "Because if I disappear, they win. And if I fight, at least someone remembers what happened here." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's finish it." She smiled faintly, the first real smile in days. "Careful, Lieutenant. You might start sounding like a soldier again." He laughed once softly. "And you might start sounding human." Her gaze drifted back to the horizon. "Not yet," she murmured. "Not until this is over." The desert wind rose, scattering ashes into the dark. And far away, the lights of Helios moved like silent predators across the sand, hunting what they couldn't control. Why did the road back to her own people feel more dangerous than enemy territory? The desert stretched for miles in every direction, painted in shades of ash and gold. Sarah and Rodriguez moved through the wasteland in silence, their shadows long and thin beneath the fatting sun. Every few minutes, she checked the ridges, scanning for movement, for reflections, for anything that broke the stillness. They had been walking for nearly 8 hours. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was loaded with exhaustion, with suspicion, with something unspoken neither dared to say aloud. When they finally reached the edge of a ravine overlooking what used to be Firebase Echo, Sarah stopped. Smoke drifted upward in lazy spirals. The smell hit first: burned diesel, scorched metal, and the faint sweetness of decay. Rodriguez exhaled slowly. So much for safe haven. Sarah crouched, scanning through binoculars. The base had been hit hard, no movement, no sentries, no comms mast active. But she caught something, faint glimmers of reflected light. "They're still there," she murmured. "Helios. Or whoever's cleaning up after them." Rodriguez tightened his grip on his rifle. "Then what's the plan?" She lowered the binoculars. "We get inside, quietly." He frowned. You can barely stand. We both need rest." "I don't need rest. I need answers." Her tone wasn't angry, just resolved. The kind of voice that came from someone who'd already buried too many excuses. They waited until dusk before making their approach. The desert cooled quickly, trading heat for silence. By the time the first stars appeared, they were moving down the ravine, every step slow and deliberate. Sarah led the way, her movements practiced, a predator's patience. Rodriguez followed, wincing with every step. They slipped through a breach in the perimeter wall and into the skeleton of what had once been a command post. The air was stale, thick with dust. Spent casings littered the floor. Sarah held up a hand, motioned to stop. Faint voices ahead. Two men, English but the cadence wrong. Contractors, not soldiers. She signaled 2 fingers, then pointed left. Rodriguez nodded, circling around through a side corridor. The men were near the comms room, flashlights sweeping lazily across stripped equipment. One of them was speaking. Orders said wipe everything, then torch the place. Yeah, and if someone comes sniffing, then we say we found it like this. Dead base, dead men, no questions. Sarah moved behind them like smoke. One motion, knife unsheathed, a whisper of steel. 2 seconds later, both men were down, silent. Rodriguez reappeared, staring at the scene. You don't hesitate, do you? She wiped the blade clean. Hesitation kills. He didn't argue. They moved deeper inside, past overturned tables and the ghosts of the war that refused to end. In the comms room, Sarah connected the flash drive Mitchell had given her to a still-functional terminal. The screen flickered weakly, then came alive. Files, coordinates, mission reports, all stamped with the same insignia, a rising sun split by a black line, the Helios emblem. Rodriguez leaned over her shoulder. What am I looking at? Black sites, she murmured. Covert handoffs. Target eliminations disguised as intelligence leaks. They've been running ops through our channels, using military cover to execute private contracts. Private contracts. Political assassinations, resource seizures, anything they can profit from. She clicked through the documents, her face pale in the blue light. One folder was marked Kandahar, Asset Loss 2019. She opened it. The screen filled with names, familiar names, her old unit, the convoy, every mission debrief she'd never been allowed to see. At the bottom, a note. Subject Black Mamba, classified termination order status, pending. Rodriguez exhaled. They've been hunting you since Kandahar. Her jaw tightened. Not just me, everyone connected to that op. The few who lived, they disappeared within months. He looked at her. Then you weren't the mistake, you were the loose end. Sarah didn't respond. She copied the files to a separate drive, pocketed it, then wiped the system clean. Let's move, she said. If they're here, reinforcements aren't far behind. They exited through the back compound and moved toward the motor pool. Most vehicles were destroyed, but one Humvee was intact, keys still dangling from the ignition. Rodriguez climbed in, grimacing. You sure this thing'll start? Sarah smirked faintly. We're about to find out. The engine roared to life, echoing across the valley. Subtle, Rodriguez muttered. We lost Subtle somewhere around Talon Valley, she said. They drove through the night, headlights off, the stars guiding them. The desert unfolded around them, endless, indifferent. After an hour, Rodriguez broke the silence. You know what gets me? None of this feels like war anymore. It's not, Sarah said quietly. It's business. He glanced at her. So what now? You going after Helios? I'm going after the proof, then whoever's left to burn it. Rodriguez studied her profile in the dim light. You ever think about just walking away, finding someplace quiet? Sarah's eyes stayed on the horizon. Every day, but every time I close my eyes, I see the people they've buried, the ones who never got the chance to walk away. For a moment, neither spoke. The road stretched endlessly ahead, straight, silent, cruel. Then headlights. 2 vehicles appeared behind them, closing fast. Sarah cursed under her breath. We've got company. Rodriguez twisted in his seat. 2 trucks, maybe 3 clicks back. Contractors, she said. They tracked the Humvee's transponder. She slammed the accelerator. The engine growled, the speedometer climbed, the desert blurred. Gunfire erupted behind them, tracer rounds slicing through the dark. Rodriguez ducked. They're firing. Hang on. Sarah jerked the wheel, cutting off-road into the dunes. The Humvee jolted violently, sand spraying across the windshield. Where the hell are you going? South, she said. Toward the ravine, they'll bottleneck trying to follow. The chase lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes of chaos, engine roar, and adrenaline. When the first truck hit a dune too hard and rolled, Sarah didn't slow down. The second closed in, its gunner opening fire. Bullets tore through the side mirror, the backseat, the dashboard. Rodriguez returned fire out the window. One lucky shot, the gunner dropped. The truck swerved, lost control, and disappeared into the dark. Silence returned, broken only by the rasp of breathing. Sarah eased the Humvee to a stop behind a ridge. Rodriguez looked over, shaking his head. "You know, you drive like a demon." She smiled faintly. "That's the only way to survive hell." They sat in the dark for a long moment. The wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of distant engines, a reminder that Helios never slept. Rodriguez finally said, "What's next?" Sarah looked at the flash drive in her hand, the small metal shape glowing faintly in the dashboard light. "There's one name in these files that keeps showing up, encrypted under every operation Helios touched. Someone called Orion." "Sounds like a call sign." "Or a handler," she said. "If I can find him, I can end this." He studied her. "You sure you're ready to walk that road?" Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "I've been walking it since Kandahar." She started the engine again. The horizon ahead was black, featureless, but in her eyes there was something new, not anger, not vengeance. Resolve. Rodriguez turned to her, voice low. "You really think one person can take down a machine like this?" Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. "One person already did." He frowned. "Who?" She glanced sideways at him, then back to the road. "The one they called Black Mamba." They drove through the night, chasing the faint promise of dawn. By morning, they reached a small village near the mountains, mud-brick houses, quiet courtyards, eyes watching from behind curtains. It was neutral ground, or as close as Afghanistan ever offered. They refueled, gathered supplies, and took shelter in an abandoned schoolhouse. While Rodriguez cleaned his weapon, Sarah sat against a wall, the flash drive open on her laptop. The encrypted folder required multiple keys. She bypassed two, failed the third, tried again. Finally, it opened. Inside, videos, drone footage, field reports, and one document titled Operation Helios, Continuity Protocol. She opened it. The text was dense, redacted, but one section stood clear. In the event of exposure, activate embedded assets within military command structures. Neutralize any operator designated M-class or higher. Black Mamba priority level 1. Her pulse quickened. M-class, that wasn't a rank, that was a category. She scrolled down further until she saw it. A photo. Fuzzy, low resolution, but unmistakable. Colonel Mitchell standing beside a man she didn't recognize. A man with dark hair wearing civilian tactical gear. Below it a name, Orion Helios Liaison. And under that a location tag, Talon Valley. Rodriguez leaned over her shoulder. "That's where this started." She nodded slowly. "And where it ends?" He frowned. "You really mean to go back there?" "Yes," she said, "because if Orion's there, so is the truth." He gave a low whistle. "You do realize this could get us both killed?" Sarah closed the laptop and looked him in the eyes. "Then at least we'll know what we died for." The wind rattled the broken window frames, and the first light of morning spilled across her face. For the first time since Kandahar, she didn't look like someone running from her past. She looked like someone walking straight into it. How far can you walk into the past before it stops being memory and becomes a trap? The wind cut cold through Talon Valley. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against a bruised sky, and the land below was scattered with ruins, old compounds, burnt-out vehicles, scars from too many wars that never ended. Sarah stood at the edge of the ridge, her rifle slung across her shoulder, watching the valley through a haze of dust. Rodriguez crouched beside her, scanning the terrain through binoculars. "It's quiet," he said. "Too quiet." She gave a small nod. "Quiet's never good." Below them, nestled between two ridges, sat the remains of an old compound, the same coordinates tagged under the Helios file. Rusted radio towers leaned over like broken bones. A convoy of armored trucks was parked near the courtyard, their matte black paint catching what little light broke through the clouds. Rodriguez frowned. That's a lot of hardware for a dead zone. Helios doesn't leave loose ends, she said. That's their command post. He lowered the binoculars. You sure you want to do this? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the compound the way a ghost might look at its own grave. Finally, she said, every lie they built started here. It ends here too. They waited until dark. When the first stars appeared, they began their descent, slow, deliberate, each step calculated. The valley floor was littered with debris from old battles. Shell casings crunched under their boots. Sarah led them to the north wall where the fencing had collapsed. The air smelled of oil and burned metal. Somewhere far off, a generator hummed faintly. Rodriguez whispered, "You still remember the layout?" "I remember enough." They slipped through a breach and moved along the shadows. Sarah counted 6 guards on rotation, professional, disciplined. These weren't insurgents. They were Helios security, probably ex-special forces. At the center of the compound stood the operations building, a 2-story structure with blackout windows and reinforced doors. Sarah motioned to Rodriguez to take the east flank while she moved toward the rear entrance. He gave her a worried look. "If this goes bad." "It will," she said, "but it won't go wrong." Then she was gone, a ghost among the ruins. Inside the operations room, the air was cold, sterile. Computer screens flickered with encrypted data. A handful of men worked in silence, unaware of the shadow that slipped through the back corridor. Sarah's movements were fluid, mechanical. One guard turned just for a second, enough for her to strike. A silent takedown. 2 more followed. No wasted motion, no sound but the soft rustle of fabric. When she reached the central console, she saw it, the Helios insignia glowing on a holographic display. A rising sun fractured by a black line. Beneath it, scrolling data. Live operations, coded names, coordinates. Her eyes froze on one line. Orion Active Command, Talon Valley Sector. She barely had time to process it before a voice spoke from behind her. "You always did prefer the back door." She spun, weapon raised. A man stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. Civilian clothes, tactical vest. Calm, unhurried. His hair was dark, his face cut from patience and arrogance in equal measure. He smiled faintly. "You must be exhausted, Sarah." Her heart stopped for a second. "You know my name." "Of course I do. I gave it to you." She froze. "What did you just say?" He stepped forward into the light. "Before you were Black Mamba, before Kandahar, before all the ghosts you keep chasing, you were part of a program, a prototype. Behavioral conditioning, cognitive mapping, long-range recon infiltration. You were my project." Her grip tightened on her weapon. "You're Orion." He nodded. "At least that's what they call me now. Titles change, missions don't." Sarah's mind raced. "You're lying. I was recruited out of Quantico." He tilted his head. "You think Quantico was an accident. You think it wasn't designed for people like you, people who follow orders even when they should." Her stomach twisted. "No. You were never supposed to end up at Kandahar," he continued. "But someone higher up fast-tracked you. They wanted to see how you'd perform under unsupervised stress. You exceeded expectations." She took a step forward. "You turned that ambush into a test." "It wasn't meant to be an ambush," Orion said softly. "It was meant to be a lesson. Control is only real when the subject believes she's free." Her breathing grew shallow. The memories that haunted her, the firefight, the dead faces, the silence afterward, they weren't chance. They were design. "Why?" she whispered. "Because we needed a weapon that could think like a human and kill like a machine," Orion said. "You were perfect, until you started asking questions." Her finger twitched on the trigger. "You used me." He smiled faintly. "We built you. You were Helios's most successful experiment." She fired. The bullet tore through the air, but Orion was faster, diving behind the console as alarms screamed through the compound. Rodriguez's voice crackled over comms. "Sarah, they're mobilizing. What the hell happened?" "Contact," she shouted. "Get out now." Gunfire exploded from the hallway. She dove behind cover, returning fire as shadows filled the room. Her shots were precise, surgical, each burst punctuated by the flash of muzzle light. Through the chaos, she saw Orion slipping through a side exit. She followed. Outside the compound was a storm of sound, sirens, gunfire, shouting. Rodriguez was pinned behind a truck, exchanging fire with two Helios soldiers. "Go," he yelled, "get him." Sarah sprinted through the chaos, chasing Orion into the northern courtyard. The air was thick with smoke. The ground trembled from distant explosions, fuel tanks going up in flames. Orion ducked into a tunnel entrance, an old Soviet escape route leading under the valley. She followed, boots pounding on concrete. The tunnel was dark, lined with flickering lights. Orion's footsteps echoed ahead of her. "You can't kill an idea, Sarah," his voice carried through the corridor. "Helios isn't a person, it's a system." She fired down the tunnel, sparks flying off metal walls. "Then I'll start with its architect." He laughed, a cold, disembodied sound. "You really think you're any different from me? You've been following orders your entire life. I just taught you to give them to yourself." His words echoed against the walls like ghosts. She moved faster. "You trained me to survive. You forgot to teach me mercy." When she turned the corner, she saw him climbing a ladder toward a steel hatch. She raised her rifle, took aim. Then a voice behind her. "Sarah." "Rodriguez." She spun. He was limping down the tunnel, bleeding from his shoulder, weapon in hand. "We have to move. They're calling in air support." She hesitated, just long enough for Orion to disappear through the hatch. By the time she climbed out, he was gone, only tire tracks leading east. Above them, the sky glowed with fire as the compound burned. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Rodriguez coughed, blood streaking his chin. "We're out of time." Sarah looked back at the flames, at the place that had built and betrayed her. "No," she said quietly, "we're out of patience." They fled into the darkness as missiles began to fall. Hours later, they sheltered inside a half-collapsed house on the edge of the valley. The world outside was ash and wind. Rodriguez sat against the wall, pale but alive. "You could have taken him," he said weakly. "Why didn't you?" She stared at the floor. "Because I wanted answers more than revenge." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "You sound like a soldier again." She shook her head. "No, soldiers fight wars they understand." He frowned. "And you?" "I'm fighting ghosts." She reached into her vest, pulling out a small drive she'd taken from the compound. It was labeled Helios Continuity Node. "This is everything," she said. "Names, locations, funding. If we can get this to someone who will listen." Rodriguez interrupted, his tone soft but firm. "Who, Sarah? Who can you trust now?" Her silence was answer enough. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. "Then it's just us." Sarah looked out the shattered window. The flames in the valley had died down, replaced by an eerie glow from the rising moon. "Just us," she repeated quietly. She thought about Orion's words. Control is only real when the subject believes she's free. Maybe that was the real war, the one no one saw. Not between nations, but inside the people used to fight them. For a long time, she sat in silence, watching the stars fade under the smoke. Finally, she said softly, almost to herself, "They made one mistake." Rodriguez opened his eyes. "What's that?" "They taught me how to hunt." How long could the truth stay buried before it started to rot the people who hid it? By dawn, they were miles away from the ruins of Talon Valley. The valley itself was nothing but smoke and silence now, another scar the desert would swallow. Sarah and Rodriguez followed an old supply road that led east toward the mountains. They moved carefully, keeping low whenever they heard aircraft. Rodriguez's wound had reopened during the night, and blood darkened the bandage on his shoulder. He didn't complain, but every step made his breathing shorter. Sarah noticed, she always did. "We need to rest," she said finally. He shook his head. "If we stop, they catch up." "They don't need to catch up," she said quietly. "They already know where we're going." He frowned. "Then why keep moving?" "Because sometimes motion is all that keeps you alive." They found shelter in the ruins of an old communications outpost built into the side of the mountain. Inside, the air was cool and stale. Faded NATO markings still clung to the walls. Sarah secured the perimeter, then used what little power remained in the generator to boot up her laptop. The small drive she'd taken from the Helios compound sat on the table, unmarked, unassuming, like something that shouldn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything. She plugged it in. Lines of encrypted code filled the screen. Behind her, Rodriguez watched, his face pale but alert. "You really think this thing's gonna tell you everything?" "I don't need everything," she said. "Just enough to break their illusion." "What illusion?" "That Helios is untouchable." The decryption took minutes that felt like hours. When the files finally opened, Sarah saw what she'd feared. Full operational rosters, bank transfers, corporate partnerships, private security firms, political donors, intelligence contracts. Helios wasn't a rogue organization. It was a network built into the bones of every system she'd ever trusted. Rodriguez read over her shoulder, eyes widening. "Jesus, they're everywhere." "They're in Washington," she murmured. "London, Dubai, every place that profits from conflict. Helios doesn't start wars, they rent them out." He swallowed hard. "And Orion." She scrolled until she found his name. Project Orion founder, head of tactical development, active location, Istanbul. Rodriguez leaned back. "So he's not even hiding." "He doesn't have to. Helios protects its own." She copied everything onto a secondary drive and disconnected the system. The hum of the generator filled the silence. Rodriguez broke it first. "You know what you're talking about doing, right? Exposing this. You'd be burning the last bridge you've got." She gave a faint smile. "Then I guess I'll learn to swim." They left the mountains that night, catching a smuggler's convoy heading north. The driver didn't ask questions. The money Sarah handed him made sure of that. By the time the sun rose, they were crossing the border into Turkmenistan. The journey was long, sleepless. Dusk clung to everything. Rodriguez drifted in and out of consciousness beside her. Sarah sat awake, her hand resting on the flash drive like a pulse. Every few hours, she replayed fragments of Orion's words in her mind. Control is only real when the subject believes she's free. She'd spent her whole career believing in orders, chains of command, duty. But now she saw it differently. Maybe control wasn't something they forced on you. Maybe it was something you accepted without realizing it. The thought unsettled her more than any enemy ever had. When they finally reached the outskirts of Istanbul, it was night again. The city spread before them like a web of light and noise, crowded streets, endless movement. To anyone else, it might have looked alive. To Sarah, it looked like camouflage. Rodriguez adjusted his sling and stared out the window. "Hard to believe this is the same world we've been fighting in." She nodded slowly. "Different battlefield, same war." They found a safe house in an abandoned apartment above the docks, one of Mitchell's old emergency contact points. Inside was a small arsenal, a radio, and a map pinned to the wall. Sarah spread the map on the table. "Orion's listed as a security consultant for a private defense expo tomorrow morning. Helios uses these events for contracts, weapons testing, money laundering." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. You plan to just walk in. She looked at him, not walk, blend. He smirked faintly, and then I make them hear the truth. The expo was hosted inside a glass and steel convention center overlooking the Bosporus. Military contractors from around the world crowded the halls, uniforms mixed with suits, badges, and smiles that never reached the eyes. Sarah entered disguised as a logistics liaison, black suit, ID tag, hair pulled back. Rodriguez stayed outside, monitoring from a stolen comms device. Her voice crackled softly in his earpiece. I'm in. 24 Helios personnel confirmed. I see Orion's delegation near the main hall. Copy that. Cameras are live. You've got a 10-minute window before someone checks that ID. She moved through the crowd, every step measured. The room buzzed with conversation, contracts, profits, promises of stability, the language of sanitized violence. At the far end of the hall, she saw him, Orion, standing beneath the Helios emblem projected onto a display wall. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. Conflict is not chaos, he told the audience. It's opportunity, and we at Helios ensure opportunity is managed responsibly. Sarah's jaw tightened. She slipped past two guards and entered a control room overlooking the stage. A wall of monitors displayed live feeds from every camera in the building. She inserted the drive into the main console. Rodriguez, she whispered, you ready? His voice came through, steady but strained. Ready as I'll ever be. She uploaded the files. One by one, the screens around the expo began to flicker, presentations glitching. The Helios logo replaced by classified documents, transaction records, images of destroyed villages, assassinations. The crowd's murmur turned to confusion, then outrage. Orion stopped mid-sentence as the screens behind him changed again, now showing his own face beside the words. Project Orion, Civilian Termination Oversight. Panic rippled through the hall. Security scrambled to shut down the feeds, but it was too late. The truth was out. Sarah's voice came through the loudspeakers, calm and clear. You called it control. You called it order. But every life you ended, every war you sold, those were people, not numbers. Orion looked up, his expression unreadable. Sarah, he said softly, almost admiringly, you really don't know when to stop. He gestured to his guards. Find her. Alarms erupted. Sarah grabbed the drive, yanked it free, and ran. Security flooded the corridors. She moved like liquid through the chaos, cutting corners, ducking through service tunnels. Rodriguez's voice hissed in her ear. They're on you. 2 teams heading for the south exit. Meet me by the pier, she said, breath sharp. She burst through a side door into the night air, the city alive with sirens and shouting. She sprinted through the docks, weaving between shipping containers. Then she saw him, Orion, waiting at the end of the pier, a pistol in his hand. Of course, she muttered. He smiled. You think leaking data changes anything? They'll bury it, they'll bury you. Maybe, she said, but at least they'll have to dig. They circled each other, the Bosporus lights flickering across the water. You could have joined us, Orion said. You were built for this world, you still are. She raised her weapon. You're wrong, I wasn't built for this world, I was built to end it. The first shots cracked like thunder. Sparks flew from steel. Sarah ducked behind a container, returned fire, controlled, deliberate. Orion moved with equal precision. They were mirrors, creator and creation, both relentless. Rodriguez's voice broke through the static. Sarah, I've got a boat, West End. She fired one last time, hitting Orion in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall. You can't kill me, he said through gritted teeth. There'll always be another. She stepped closer, eyes cold. Then I'll keep killing ghosts until the real ones show up. He raised his weapon again, but Rodriguez's shot rang out from the shadows, clean, decisive. Orion dropped to his knees, shock frozen on his face. Sarah approached slowly. End of the line, she said. He looked up, blood in his teeth. End of yours, he rasped. You'll never escape what we made you. She stared at him for a long moment, then she holstered her gun. You're right. And walked away. Behind her, Orion's body slumped forward. The pier burned in silence. Hours later, the two of them drifted across the water in a small motorboat, Istanbul's skyline fading behind them. Rodriguez leaned back exhausted, his arm wrapped in a fresh bandage. So, what now? Sarah watched the horizon. Now we see what truth costs. You think anyone will listen? They don't need to, she said. It's out there, it'll move on its own. He nodded slowly. You really think this ends Helios? No, she said softly, but it ends me. Rodriguez turned toward her. You mean you're walking away? She didn't answer. The city lights were shrinking behind them, swallowed by the night. Sarah, he said quietly, whatever they turned you into, that's not who you are anymore. She smiled faintly, eyes on the dark horizon. Maybe, but some ghosts don't fade, they just change uniforms. The wind carried their silence across the water. In the distance, police sirens echoed faintly, chasing something that was already gone. Why does silence always come after truth, and never before it? 3 weeks had passed since Istanbul burned. 3 weeks since the Helios servers went dark, and the world pretended not to notice. Somewhere in Europe, in a city that didn't ask questions, a woman rented a small room above a repair shop. She paid in cash. She kept no phone, no name. The old man who owned the building called her Miss Chen. She didn't correct him. Every morning, she sat by the window with a cup of tea that went cold before she drank it, watching people go to work, laugh, live things that once felt foreign to her. Sometimes she wondered if the world knew how close it had come to breaking, or if it had always been this fragile and simply pretended otherwise. The news said nothing about Helios. The corporations went quiet, the politicians changed their phrasing, and the wars continued under different acronyms. The headlines spoke of data leaks and rogue operatives, but no one mentioned the name Black Mamba. That was fine by her. Rodriguez's voice still echoed in her mind sometimes. You really think this ends them? She told him no, and she'd been right. Helios hadn't died, it had simply changed skin. Systems like that didn't disappear, they adapted. But even systems could bleed when you cut them deep enough. The files she leaked had been copied across the internet, whispered through journalist circles, encrypted in message boards. The truth was alive now, in fragments, spreading like a rumor that refused to die. Sarah knew she couldn't control what came next, but maybe that was the point. Maybe truth wasn't meant to be controlled, only released. Outside, rain fell softly on the rooftops. The world kept moving, indifferent to what she'd done. She watched it anyway, quietly, like someone studying a painting they once been part of. 2 months later, in a government office somewhere in D.C., 2 men reviewed a classified file stamped Black Mamba, TERMINATED. She was one of ours, the younger man said quietly. The older one didn't look up. She was never ours, just another tool that learned how to think. What about Helios? Disbanded, publicly at least, privately. The man gave a thin smile. Privately, it's alive and well. You don't erase infrastructure that valuable. And if she resurfaces? The older man finally looked up. She won't. But his tone carried a trace of doubt, the kind that kept men like him awake at night. Half a world away, Sarah walked through a crowded market in silence. Her hair was shorter now, her gait slower, almost ordinary. She carried a worn canvas bag over her shoulder and spoke just enough of the local language to barter for bread and coffee. To anyone watching, she was no one, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She sat at a small cafe near the edge of the square, the noise of life surrounding her, vendors shouting, children laughing, music playing faintly from a radio. She took a sip of her coffee and looked at the people moving through sunlight and shadow. For the first time in years, her hand didn't shake. Maybe that was what peace looked like, not silence, not safety, but the small moments between running and remembering. A man at the next table dropped a newspaper. It slid to her feet, face down. She picked it up absently and froze when she saw the headline. Defense official found dead in Geneva. Leaked files linked to Helios scandal. Her chest tightened. The photograph was blurred, but she recognized the background, the same conference where Orion had spoken weeks earlier. The world was starting to stir. Helios was bleeding again. She folded the paper, placed it on the table, and stared into her coffee. Rodriguez had left her a message before they parted ways, a note scrawled on the back of an ammunition receipt. You can't fix everything, but you can make sure the next lie costs more than the last one. She carried that note in her pocket now, the ink faded, the paper creased. Sometimes she read it before sleep, as if it were a prayer for people who no longer believed in miracles. That night she walked to the edge of the city, an overlook where the ocean met the cliffs. The wind was cold, sharp, honest. She stood there for a long time, listening to the waves. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the black water below, familiar yet distant, like a memory trying to become real again. She thought of all the faces she'd lost. The Marines at Condor, Colonel Mitchell, the ghosts from Kandahar. She thought of Orion, the man who'd built her and died trying to own her. And then she thought of herself. The quiet analyst who became a weapon. The weapon who became a myth. And the myth who just wanted to stop being both. The world would never know her story. They would only know the fallout, the leaks, the chaos, the quiet ripples spreading through governments that once thought themselves untouchable. But maybe that was enough. Maybe legends weren't meant to be remembered by name, but by consequence. She pulled the dog tags from her pocket, Mitchell's. She'd carried them since the day he died. The metal was worn, the engraving half faded. She traced the letters with her thumb, then let them drop into the sea. For a moment, they caught the moonlight before sinking out of sight. Rest now, she whispered. You were right. The wind carried her words away, scattering them like dust across the waves. The next morning, a courier in Athens received a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a short note written in clean, deliberate handwriting. For those who still remember what the uniform meant. The courier handed it to a journalist who passed it to another. Within days, the contents, hundreds of Helios contracts, financial trails, and private communications reached the press. Governments scrambled. Names disappeared from directories overnight. The public demanded answers that would never come. But the truth was out. Not all of it, never all, but enough to wound the machine again. And somewhere in a small coastal town that didn't exist on any map, a woman sat on a porch watching the tide. Her hands were steady now, her eyes tired but calm. When a child from the village walked by, chasing a ball that rolled toward her, she smiled and kicked it back gently. The child laughed, waved, and ran off. For a second, Sarah almost forgot the weight she carried. She looked at her reflection in the glass door, a stranger who had stopped running. And in that reflection, she finally saw not the operator or the myth, but the woman who had survived both. The sun dipped low, washing the sky in gold. Somewhere far behind her, the world spun.